Lesson 16 Project Video Help. King Sherman has found a small unicorn that looks like it might be related to the eggs Queen Margaret found. He wants to pen the unicorn so he can study it. He has 200 meters of fencing to build his pen for the unicorn. He wants to make a rectangular pen in the royal courtyard to study the unicorn. King Sherman has 200 meters of fencing to build his pen for the unicorn. Since he wants to make a rectangular pen, he knows that the area of the pen can be represented as area equals length times width, where the L equals length and W equals width. He also knows that the perimeter of a rectangle is perimeter equals 2L plus 2W. What is the length in terms of the width, given that the width is x meters? Alright, so we know that the width is x meters. We also know he has 200 meters of fencing. So that means if we have a rectangle and he needs to put fencing around the whole thing, that means that we have 200 meters of fencing to go around the whole thing. So that means that 200 meters is our perimeter. So we're going to use the formula for perimeter. So we know that we have 200 is our p value. So we have p equals 2l plus 2w. So we can plug in the 200 for p. Then we're going to leave our L how it is. That's what we're trying to solve for currently. And we know that X is represented by X, or W is represented by X. So now we need to solve for L. So we want to get this L by itself. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get rid of this plus 2X. So we're going to subtract 2X from both sides. So we now have 200 minus 2X equals 2L. And then we have that it's multiplied by 2. So we need to get rid of that. So we're going to divide everything by 2. So we're going to have 200 minus 2x divided by 2, which gives us L. And now, we can leave it in this form, or we could write it as 1/2 times the quantity, 200 minus 2x, because this dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by a half. Or we could also write this if we split this fraction up here. 200 divided by 2 is 100, and 2x divided by 2 is just a negative x. So any of these three ways work out for our answer there for what the length is in terms of the width. Refer to your answer for the previous question. Based on your answer to the previous question, which function represents the area of the pen? So our area is our length times our width. So we need any of the ones for our length. So I'm going to go ahead and use the 1/2 times 200 minus 2x, that's our length, times our width is represented by x. So now we're going to multiply this out. So if we have 1/2 and we distribute it inside, we end up with 100 minus an x, which is what we did on the last slide, still times our x. Now we gotta distribute our x throughout. So we get 100 times x is 100x. Negative x times x is a negative x squared. So that would be our formula that represents our area, is 100x minus x squared. The king is placing the pen in an area with 600 square meters of space. He wants the pen to take up no more than 1/3 of the space available. What is an equation that represents this situation? Well, we know that it's 600, so we can write a proportion. So we want our area of our pen, A of x, over 600. So whatever our area is that we get, divided by 600 should equal no more than 1/3. So we can write this proportion here so that our area over 600, since we have a total of 600, equals 1/3, since we want it to take up no more than 1/3. So 1/3 is the maximum that it can equal. Okay. Refer to your answers to the two previous questions. What is the approximate value of x? Round your answers to 2 decimal places. Well, if you remember the two previous questions, we got that our area formula is 100x minus x squared, and we had the proportion of a of x divided by 600 equals 1/3. So I'm going to take my area formula here, I'm going to plug it into my equation there and solve for x. So I'm going to have 100x minus x squared divided by 600 equals 1/3. So now to solve this, I'm going to cross multiply. So 100x minus x squared times 3 equals my 600 times 1. So when I distribute my 3, I get 300x minus 3x squared equals 600. So now I need to solve this for x. So I want to get everything over to the same side and equal it to 0. Now, the easiest way to do that is you want your x squared to be positive if you can. So currently my x squared is negative. So I'm going to add my 3x squared to both sides. So I now have 300x equals 3x squared plus 600. And then subtract my 300x so that I can have everything on the same side. So I get 0 equals 3x squared minus 300x plus 600. Now, I need to know if I can factor this or not. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take out my GCF. My GCF is 3. So I'm going to factor a 3 out. X squared minus 100x plus 600 divided by 3 gives me a 200. So now I can divide by 3 on both sides. So I end up with 0 equals x squared minus 100x plus 200. Now I don't see any factors right off the bat that I can multiply to get to 200 but add to get to negative 100. So I'm going to use the quadratic formula. So remember the quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So I'm going to plug in my values. So remember that a is the coefficient in front of x squared, b is the coefficient in front of x, and c is the constant. So I'm going to have negative 100 plus or minus the square root of negative 100 squared minus 4 times 1 times 200 all over 2 times 1. So negative 100 gives me a positive 100 plus or minus the square root negative 100 squared gives me 10,000. And 4 times 1 times 200 is a negative 800 all over 2. So now if I do my subtraction inside here, I get 100 plus or minus the square root of 9200 all over 2. And then I can split this up now. 100 plus the square root of 9200 over 2 and 100 minus the square root of 9200 divided by 2. Now I don't need to try and reduce my square root of 9200 because in the original equation it tells me it wants my answers rounded to 2 decimal places. So since it wants my answer rounded to 2 decimal places, I can just go ahead and type in each of these equations into my calculator, making sure I follow order of operations, put my parentheses in the correct spot, and then get an answer. So I have that when I do the subtraction, I end up with a 97.958 here and a 2.0417. Now I want to round it to 2 decimal places. So if I look at my first one, I have 9 and 5 are my first two, but I need to look at the one after. So if I look at the 8, that means that my 5 is going to round up. So one of my answers is going to be 97.96. And then if I look at my other one, I have 0, 4, and my third number there that I'm going to look at is a 1. The 1's not going to make the 4 round up, so this is just going to stay as 2.04. So those would be my two approximate answers for my value of x.